one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Welcome to Farage. Now, clearly Nigel is away tonight. Some of you may be asking at home this question.
Who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you.
Well, thanks, Nigel. My name's Tom Harwood. I'm the Deputy Political Editor at GB News. And the reason I'm sitting in here for Nigel tonight is it's his birthday. Shall we hear from the man himself?
I'm so sorry I can't be with you tonight. I'd love to have been on GB News. You know I would, but hey, you know what? It's my 60th birthday. The party begins at 7 o'clock. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for your support. Over to Tom Harwood.
Well, a very happy birthday to Nigel. But we've got a packed show today, and not least, we'll be talking about a very serious issue in the Middle East, now involving Brits. Yes, the air raid from Israel that killed 3 British former service people, John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby. Now, what will the response to this be? Big questions to ask of UK government and indeed our arms exports. But also a story from the Channel just days after an exclusive about the lack of security around Calais, a migrant has been stabbed. We'll speak to our very own Mark White about his exclusive report and whether we can really be sure of safety around our borders. Now, MPs have also been calling for a tax on frequent flyers. They want to control demand to reduce the number of people flying. We ask, is that the right thing to do for ordinary Brits? All that to come, but before a packed show tonight, it's your news with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Tom. Good evening. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. A new poll suggests Labour could sweep to victory with more than 400 seats at the next election, leaving the Tories with just 155. YouGov is predicting a landslide for Sir Keir Starmer, with the Conservatives projected to win even less seats than a previous poll conducted in January. And another change of leader may be off the cards, with other MPs, including Penny Mordaunt, Ian Duncan-Smith and Jacob Rees-Mogg, all trailing their Labour challengers. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy says the government should suspend arms sales to Israel if it's clear that international law has been breached. It's after British aid workers John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby were killed when their convoy was hit by an Israeli airstrike while they were delivering vital food aid. They were part of a group of 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen Organisation. Mr Lammy says Britain cannot supply arms to Israel if it's proven to have broken international law.
I have now been calling for 12 days for David Cameron to publish the legal advice so that we are clear on whether Israel has contravened international humanitarian law and therefore arms sales should be suspended.
1 in 20 people who try to book GP appointments over the telephone are told to call back another day. That's according to a major new survey. It found that a third of people in England who have tried to book an appointment in the last month say they've struggled to speak to someone. More than 1 in 10 whose calls were answered were told they'd need to wait for more than 2 weeks. And among those who eventually did get an appointment, 20% reported having a poor experience. A teacher who described girls from Western backgrounds as lunatics has been banned from teaching indefinitely. An investigation found Akib Khan, who's from Birmingham, told students that those who support feminism would be replaced by Muslims. It's understood he also sent topless pictures of himself to messaging groups that included students. The Teaching Regulation Agency says Mr Khan engaged in serious misconduct and undermined what were described as fundamental British values. And a religious charity is warning the Scottish Government against banning conversion therapy for LGBT people. The Christian Institute says the proposal is too broad and risks punishing what it calls harmless behaviour. But the Scottish Government has rejected the claim, saying the proposed law would only apply when there's a clear intention to suppress someone's sexuality. A survey found that 7% of LGBT people in Scotland have been subjected to or offered conversion therapies. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom.
Now, should we suspend arms sales to Israel? That's a question that has been raised tonight, of course, following the incident that occurred in Israel. 3 Brits killed in an aid convoy trying to deliver aid that had just arrived for the Gaza Strip. Now, this aid convoy was, of course, travelling in a corridor that had been predetermined with the Israeli authorities. It was meant to be safe. Those Britons were meant to be safe. And yet they were struck down by a strike that Israel has admitted was its own. Big questions tonight on what the implications of this are. What should Britain's response be, if at all? And I want your views. Should we be suspending arms exports to Israel? That's what the Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy has now said that we should do if this has been found to be a war crime. Of course, you can tweet Farage on GB News. That hashtag remains the same, as does the email, farage@gbnews.com. Let's dive into this story now. I'm joined by Boaz Bismuth, a Member of Parliament in the Israeli Knesset, their parliament, and former Israeli ambassador to the West African Arab country of Mauritania. Boaz, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I think the first question that would be on everyone's lips is how on earth could this happen? This was meant to be a safe route. Israel is meant to be one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. How did you get it so wrong?
First of all, thank you for inviting me. You will allow me, first of all, condolences to the families. When I think of the families, I think of their grief. And of course, I share their grief with them. Mistakes are done in wars, and you know it better than me. Everybody knows it. I mean, unfortunately, every country, every nation who's at war knows that you've got mistakes. Unfortunately, also in this war, we have many casualties. Many soldiers who died from friendly fire, meaning from our own army. Happens, you know, it's a tough place, Gaza, and you're fighting against terrorists, and you've got, of course, civilians over there, and you have to take care not to hit them, of course. And you've got the tunnels over there. It's a very complicated platform, this Gaza Strip where war is being held between Israel and a terrorist entity. So you have to understand, humanitarians are there, and it's important for humanitarians to be there. And Israel, of course, has said from day one, allowed humanitarians to go inside. More than 17,000 trucks went inside. And unfortunately, in such a war, mistakes also are being made. And I can tell you one thing, Israel is going to investigate in a very, very large scale in order to understand what has happened. And again, as I said before, and I say it again, we share our grief with the families. It was a mistake, and we're very, very sorry about it.
Well, as I think a lot of people in the United Kingdom are instinctively friends of Israel. They think of Israel as an ally, as a friend in this world, particularly in the fight against terrorism, a fight that our two countries share. But particularly when it's a friend that might have done something wrong, it's up to friends to have those frank conversations. I think we'd be doing the same if Brits were killed in an American strike anywhere in the world. We will be doing the same, of course, with this. And the question is, how on earth could this be such a terrible mistake, given this wasn't one explosion in one car, in one go? These were 3 explosions. One car blown up. Some people escaped, ran to a second car, according to some reports. Then that exploded. And then a third. 3 separate strikes, all on cars that were branded as part of the World Centre Kitchen. This, an organisation that has helped Israelis in the aftermath of those terrible October attacks. One of the good guys in this fight.
We never said the opposite. I don't say the opposite. On the contrary, I said, apologize. I said that we're going to investigate in a very large scale in order to understand what has happened over there. As I said also, mistakes in wars, are being done. I told you, do you really think that the Israelis want to kill Israelis? Of course not. Let me remind you a very, very sad episode in this war. 3 of our hostages, unfortunately, that died. And we said it. We did not try to hide it. It was during the war. We came in to tell the families it was our mistake. It's a very, very tough war. Of course, there's no excuses. It shouldn't happen. I will not come to tell you that, these things happen and therefore we go on. No, this is something that should not happen. It happened and we're going to investigate in order not to make it happen again. Humanitarian aid is important. We have to take care and to make sure that not only humanitarian aid, also civilians. We're targeting terrorists. We're not targeting civilians. We're not targeting humanitarian aid. We're not targeting anyone who's not involved in the war by itself. But let me tell you one thing. At the beginning of your program, I heard you mentioning, of course, about those who want to punish in Israel, if you want, not to sell us arms because of what has happened. Let me remind you again, this was a mistake. You said it yourself in a very honest and a very fair way. But not to sell arms to Israel is to take sides in this war. Now, you have to understand one thing. This is a war between a state, a friendly state, Israel state, and a terrorist group. Now, would you even think of taking sides if there is Al-Qaeda against America or Al-Qaeda against Australia or Boko Haram against, I don't know what, choose an African country that you want, or ISIS? Of course not. This war is by a country, by a country where you've got the rule of law, a country that on 7th of October was savagely attacked. Like as if you would go to the episode of the Attila the Hun, or barbarians or vandals. And by the way, what are we doing right now? We're making a war also for our friends in the West, also for the Gazawi people, taking away a terrorist entity and especially bringing back our hostages, among them young girls and, of course, a baby, 1-year-old. And people, have lost it or forgot it. And I don't feel a lot of compassion from the world.
No,
and again, let me tell you,
we are short on time.
7th of October is actuality. It's not history. It's happening now.
I want a quick word from you, if you have a personal message for the shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, the man likely to be the next Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom. He said tonight that his government would suspend arms sales to Israel if this is found to be a war crime. What do you say to David Lammy?
I would tell him just something very, very simple. I would expect any person, whether you've got responsibility or any citizen of the world right now, of the free world, if you have to choose between a country that was attacked and have hostages in Gaza, including young girls, young women, and a baby 1-year-old, and a terrorist group like Hamas, who doesn't hesitate to kill his own people, choose which side are you on? That's it. I would ask him a question. Which side, sir, are you on?
Which side are you on? Profound words indeed. Well, Boaz Bismuth, really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on and putting across your case, Israeli MP, and of course...
And by the way, when I saw you, I didn't ask the question, who are you? I know you are.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. Now, let's get more on the details of this. It's very easy for David Lammy to say, well, potentially let's stop arms sales to Israel. But what would that actually mean? What would that mean for the British economy? What would that mean for the arms industry? And could it be practically done in any short order? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Martin Drew, the founder of the British Export Control and former Special Advisor to the Parliamentary Committee on Export Controls. Really appreciate your time this evening. Just very simply, What sort of arms do we export to Israel as things stand?
Good evening, Tom. Having looked at the statistics that's available to us, and there isn't a great deal clearly because it's confidential information held by the British government, not a great deal is the answer. I think looking at the last 2 years, about £20 million worth of exports of military equipment. And I think it's useful to refer to it as that. Arms is often an emotive phrase, guns and bombs, effectively. But the whole military equipment range lists from Land Rovers, night vision equipment, bomb disposal, etc. Obviously, including the guns and bombs that one associates with more Hollywood movies. So I think probably we import more goods from Israel of the military variety than we probably export. Mostly it's components of high-value military equipment, radars, aircraft, helicopters, etc.
That's a really, really interesting point because, of course, trade works both ways. And is it your expert opinion that if the United Kingdom were to ban exports, arms exports, whatever that means, military exports, whether that would include Jaguar, Land Rovers and Kevlar vests and whatever else, and defensive material as well, whether or not that's what David Lammy is considering, I suppose you and I can't ascertain at this point. But do you think that would mean there would be retaliatory action that would affect the exports to us?
I think clearly, obviously, there'll be some form of retaliation. Any state has its own export control system. And yes, if David Lammy were the Foreign Secretary, technically the control is under the Secretary of State for the Department of Business and Trade, holds the pen for this matter. But the Foreign Office have a significant input into whether licences to export military goods are permitted. I think primarily it's a case of the UK as a reliable supplier. If I can use some form of a Honda Civic, for example, when you buy a Honda Civic, you expect Honda to supply the parts to you. If halfway down the line they decide not to supply parts to you, then people are going to stop buying Honda's materials. And it's the same with the UK. If we've sold them high-value items like radar systems, night vision equipment, etc., and halfway through that supply, halfway through that contract, we then pull the plug on them, then clearly we're not a country that people are going to come to purchase defence equipment in future. And as we know, the acquisition...
No, that is such an important issue that you raised there, Martin, because reliability really does matter. Dependability really does matter. And I suppose the question that will be raised of all of the MPs, because it's not just David Lammy and the Labour Party suggesting that arms exports could now be suspended. The leader of the Liberal Democrats said much the same thing earlier today. If that really does mean suspending contracts mid-contract, that could have much wider economic implications for this country. That could cost jobs. That could cost a lot more revenue than just the revenue that we get from arms sales.
Very much so. We certainly see in the defence sector that if a supplier in the UK won't supply you with whatever the item is, armoured Land Rovers, for example, that people will go elsewhere. And once they've gone elsewhere, like any product, they won't come back to you. Many companies have been facing significant financial ruin by the fact that contracts have gone to other countries who have facilitated the shipment with a great deal more ease than we have in the UK. Israeli export licenses have already been under significant scrutiny by the Foreign Office for many years. Again, it's a case of if the Foreign Office wants to stop exports, it can stop them immediately. Each export is carried out, license is carried out on an individual basis. But again, we have to appreciate that if we've bought Israeli drones, for example, the parts we need for the British Army to operate those drones will cease that afternoon, and we can't simply go and get them from elsewhere. Similarly, suppliers will then know if you buy from the UK, if you buy a high-value item, we can't guarantee, depending on the government, if you'll get the spare parts for that. Again, back to your Honda Civic. Who knows if the British will decide one afternoon they're going to let you have the spare parts. One afternoon that the next government is in, and you won't get the spare parts. You've got a huge pile of very expensive rusting metal.
No, it's a very profound warning. Actually, how much could this degrade our own armed forces if we break down these relationships? It's not just about the exports, it's about the imports, it's about the equipment that our own armed forces use as well. We're a country that doesn't make that much anymore. Yes, we have car factories, that's a specialism, but also the defence industry perhaps is a specialism of British manufacturing, of British exports. Just how important is it to the UK economy?
It's one of those industries that's often not seen. And I think we associate with the arms industry, perhaps again, the guns and bombs, the crates of Kalashnikovs that you see in Hollywood movies. But what we specialise in the UK is very high value, very expensive equipment, the Gucci end of the defence sector, if you like, the electronics, the aircraft parts, the radar parts, which themselves aren't necessarily kinetic, but bring in vast amounts of money to the UK exchequer in relation to in sales. Once that's gone, once somebody's gone to another supplier, they're not going to come back. Similarly with human nature, if your neighbour has bought something from France or something from America, and you start looking at that, you'll buy from them if they're more reliable. The effects on companies, one export license going through and a reputation going through can shut a company with engineering excellence that goes back decades, unfortunately. These are not decisions to be made lightly and effectively have decades of repercussions if they're made incorrectly.
No, it's a profound issue. Martin, you've explained it absolutely excellently. I think everyone can really understand what has gone on there. Of course, you're a former special advisor to that Parliamentary Export Control Committee. Really, really important stuff for the UK and the wider economy as well. The question must be asked, I suppose, if you forego all the tax revenue from those arms exports, how do you make that up? Are you going to raise taxes? Or are you going to cut public services? That's, I suppose, a question for those politicians saying that we should cease these arms exports. Really, really important questions there. Now, stay with us here on Farage, because up next, we've got an exclusive report from the Channel. Our very own Home and Security editor, Mark White, will be here to tell us precisely what's going on. It's a dangerous and ever more dangerous security situation.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
When I was president of the Durham Union, in 2016-17, I was hosting a debate, which was the question, this House sees China as a threat to the West. Now, it wasn't saying that that's what we believed. That was a question.
Up for debate.
On one side, we had the former Foreign Secretary, Sir Malcolm Rifkind. On the other side, we invited a woman by the name of Anastasia Lin. Now, she's someone who's been expelled from China for her human rights activism. She's a former Miss World contestant who's a great speaker. But we started getting loads of complaints into my inbox from Chinese students at Durham University, and they started to say, why are you hosting this debate? Why have you invited Anastasia Lin? She is banned from China. You can't host this woman. You can't host her. You can't have her in your debate.
Were they copy and paste jobs?
They were all very, very similar. And we were sort of thinking, well, this is a union that is hundreds of years old, founded on the principles of free speech. We're not going to listen because some students are upset. And then it got to the point where I was pulled out of a tutorial that I was in, told to go to the union office and take a phone call from the Chinese embassy. And so I was taking a phone call here from diplomats in the Chinese embassy saying, you have to cancel this debate. You have to cancel this debate.
Crazy.
At one point, they even threatened the UK's trade terms with China. I think they thought that I was perhaps a representative of the British state. I wasn't. I was a student. But I ignored them and I said, no, we're going to host this debate. We hosted the debate. It was a massive success. We heard strong arguments on either side. And frankly...
You know what, it's a good thing that you were there to make sure that your university and its union upheld the values of Britain and our liberal democracy.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 23 minutes past 7. I'm not Nigel Farage. I'm sitting in for Nigel on his 60th birthday. Very happy birthday, Nigel. My name's Tom Harwood, and this is GB News. Now, we've been asking the question tonight, should we suspend arms sales to Israel? We had a very interesting interview just before the break that tried to get to the bottom of what that exactly means. It's a bit more complicated than some politicians like to make out. But Daryl has written in to say, the death of British aid workers was a terrible accident, but Israel is facing an impossible situation from those who want Israel's destruction. And I think that is a fair point to make, a fair point to raise. Israel is a country that is operating in incredibly difficult circumstances, not just with terrorists in Gaza that hide amongst civilians, but also with hostile states that border all sides of that country. Henry says, no, we need to give them more to end this war that Hamas started. And of course, Israel has always said that if the threat from Israel is eradicated and the hostages are released, this war will come to an end, but they want to degrade that Hamas capability. Liv has written in to say that actually we should suspend arms sales to Israel. Liv says, yes, we should suspend arms sales, but only if we suspend or stop altogether sales to everywhere. Now, that would be quite the hit to British manufacturing and the wider economy. I'm not sure there'd be any politician brave enough to say that, even though that perhaps suspending sales to Israel would have that knock-on effect, as we were discussing. But Johnny says there is no way Israel deliberately hit the aid vehicle. It's war, one that Hamas started, and accidents happen. So it seems on balance, you at home think that we shouldn't suspend our arms sales, no matter what David Lammy has had to say this evening. But we're going to turn to a security issue closer to home now, because a migrant has been stabbed in the camp at Calais, this jungle, as it's sometimes known, of people waiting to cross across to the United Kingdom, trying to get on boats. Well, our very own home and security editor, Mark White, has had an exclusive report in the last few days saying that the security situation there was getting worse, to some extent foreboding, warning of this situation. Mark, did you see this coming?
Well, certainly we've been told by security sources that the situation in northern France is getting increasingly violent, both migrant-on-migrant violence and violence from migrants aimed at the French authorities because they don't like the French intervening, trying to puncture their dinghies and stopping these boats from launching in the first place. Now, the latest incident happened at an area called Lune Plage, which is an area of woodland and abandoned rail tracks on the outskirts of Dunkirk. It can house this makeshift camp, more than 1,000 people, but it's sporadically raided by the French authorities. At the moment, we're at a period where there's probably a couple of hundred migrants there or so. But emergency services were called to reports of a migrant having been stabbed on the outside of this camp at Lune Plage. When they got there, they found a man in his 30s with multiple stab wounds to his chest. French fire brigade paramedics tried to work on this man to save his life for around about an hour, but were unable to save his life. He died at the scene. The French police have had no cooperation at all from other migrants. No one has come forward to give them any information, and as yet no suspects are in custody, but of course they suspect that this person died at the hands of another migrant. And it follows, as I say, growing levels of violence. Just a fortnight ago, you may remember, a boat that crossed the English Channel arriving in Dover Harbour with a migrant on board who had been stabbed. We got exclusive footage of the time of emergency services who were at Dover Harbour awaiting the arrival of that small boat. Now, this migrant, it turns out, had been stabbed by a criminal people smuggler on a beach near Calais because he was attempting to get onto a small boat without paying. And this is an increasing phenomenon, especially among African migrants who don't have the money to pay the people smugglers. Instead, they try to rush the boats on the beach as they're launching and try just to push their way on board. When they come up against the people smugglers, then that often ends very violently. And then again, just recently, another incident, very worrying, in Boulogne, further down the coast, where some 350 migrants were attempting to launch 4 small boats. The French police tried to intervene. They got pelted with sticks and stones, other missiles. The migrants even poured petrol on the beach to try to set that alight to keep the French police away from puncturing those boats, and a number of French officers were injured in this. So increasing levels of violence, a sign of the desperation, but a sign too, I think, Tom, of just how lucrative this trade is, how valuable it is to the criminal gangs, and they will fight for their turf, and they will fight against those who try to get on board these boats and get a free ride to the UK.
Mark, just an extraordinary set of stories there, really. Time and time again seeing increased violence, increased insecurity there. And it only beggars the question, why on earth have we not yet got a grip on those people coming across, given the state of violence now on those boats and on the shores as well? Mark White, GB News Home and Security Editor, really thank you for your time there. Really, really worrying situation. Of course, if you have views, Farage at gbnews.com. But we're going to be moving on to another story after the break. A free speech row that has erupted in the wake of the Scottish new law, this law passed that pervades every part of our lives, not just online, not just with strangers, but it comes into our very homes for anyone living in Scotland. But there's a question too for Rishi Sunak and his Conservative government. Are there laws on the UK statute book that could be comparable? We'll get to that question after this.
Hello again and welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Well, there will be some further heavy rain first thing across southern areas, but in general, Thursday offers some much drier weather compared to the wet weather we've seen recently. Northeastern areas have suffered the most with the rain throughout today. That rain will clear away through tonight, but the next batch arrives into the southwest. We'll see 2 bursts of rain. This one will turn heavy at first in the southwest, but as it pushes into parts of northern England, it will turn a little bit dry, but most areas will see some heavy outbreaks of rain through the night. Further north and west, though, it should stay dry, and we could see a touch of frostbite tomorrow morning. But it's in the southwest tomorrow morning where the heaviest rain will be, and that will push into parts of Wales, the Midlands, into the southeast throughout the rush hour. So if you are moving about on Thursday morning, expect some tricky travelling conditions. Once that does clear out the way, we'll see a mix of sunshine and showers for many areas of England and Wales. There will be some decent sunny spells in between. It will feel fairly pleasant in that sunshine, but further north, it's going to considerably drier day than it has been lately. We'll see highs of around 10 or 11 degrees across northwestern areas. It's still cold though in the far north of Scotland, and as the next batch of rain bumps into that cold air on Friday morning, there's a risk of some snow across the Highlands and Grampians, and we'll see outbreaks of quite heavy rain push through many northern areas throughout Friday. Further south though, it turns drier as the day goes on, but the weekend is looking unsettled and seasonably windy, but exceptionally mild. That's all for now. Bye-bye.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I'm Patrick Christys. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christys tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
It's 7:33 and you're watching Farage with me, Tom Harwood. Now, a row that has been rumbling on through this week is, of course, the new hate crime law in Scotland, a law that's policing speech. And many Conservative politicians in the United Kingdom, not least the Prime Minister, have had a lot to say about it. Indeed, Rishi Sunak, speaking yesterday, said that we believe in free speech, Conservatives will always protect it. That was Rishi Sunak jumping to the defence of J.K. Rowling with her potential legal trouble over that new law. But it got me thinking, have the Conservatives always protected free speech? Because it's not just the new Scottish hate crime law that has restricted the ability to say outrageous or even offensive things. No, there was a law that was passed in 2003 by Tony Blair under the Communications Act that has forbidden what's called grossly offensive communication. The Conservatives, of course, have not repealed this law. And what has that led to? Well, it's led to one man in Scotland before the new hate crime legislation, but under this 2003 legislation covering the whole UK. Under that legislation, one man has been arrested for off-colour jokes about Captain Tom Moore. That was reported only a couple of years ago. Very, very disrespectful and distasteful words, but arrested for words nonetheless. Another man was arrested after filming his pug dog performing Nazi salutes. Some might say an incredibly distasteful joke. Indeed, disrespectful words that were used during that as well. But that got a call from the police. And a further man who, a very disrespectful episode this, he received a suspended jail sentence for an offensive video of a model of Grenfell Tower. It was a video that was sent around on WhatsApp. Now, we can all say that joking about Grenfell Tower would be an awful, disrespectful, frankly inhuman thing to do. But should it be illegal? Indeed, should the concept of free speech not apply here? And has Rishi Sunak been a touch hypocritical when he says that Conservatives will always protect free speech? Let's get more on this now with Dr. Benjamin Jones, the Director of Case Operations at the Free Speech Union. Benjamin, thank you for joining us. I want to dig into this issue here because people often say that we have free speech in the United Kingdom. But in certain cases, it seems like we don't.
I think we have free speech in the United Kingdom if you're retired and or independently wealthy, and you don't have to rely on the good wishes of your employer to keep your job. You're not bound by upholding a statement of values as part of your contract. In terms of the legislation, I think I'd give 4 examples that apply in England or to the entire United Kingdom. There's the Public Order Act, which forbids stirring up hatred on the grounds of race or religious belief. That language of stirring up hatred is also used, of course, now in the Scottish Hate Crime Act. I'd also point, as you have, to the Communications Act, which makes it an offence to cause anxiety needlessly to another. The Malicious Communications Act also, and more recently, the Online Safety Act, which is going to place the internet in the hands of Ofcom, who will be charged with regulating it. And I think I don't need to.
We're big fans of Ofcom here.
Yeah, I don't need to spell out for you or for your viewers what a disaster we think that's going to be at the Free Speech Union. So on the plus side, I would say that we do have the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act. So that is in the credit of the Conservative government for doing that. That will protect students and academics and visiting speakers at universities. That's something that the Free Speech Union campaigned for many years. So we're delighted with that. But you're right, the picture is not a rosy one.
So I'm asking, really, why then are so many commentators and public figures and elected politicians saying, isn't this awful in Scotland? We'd never do a sort of an act of parliament like the Scottish Parliament has just passed, that came into effect at the start of this week. It seems that politicians have passed similar bills in England, and perhaps most perniciously, might pass more such bills yet.
Well, I agree with every word of that, but I would say that the Scottish Hate Crime Act is particularly egregious. I mean, in the last 6 hours alone, it's gone from being an abject disaster to an utter farce, and a sinister farce at that. It has this offence of stirring up hatred. That's on various grounds, curiously not on the grounds of biological sex, but on the grounds of age or transgender identity. And it has a much lower threshold for prosecution than the equivalent UK legislation does. So it includes, for instance, threatening, abusive or insulting speech. Now that, I submit to you, is going to include a lot of people who have expressed views that are the majority view across the UK, certainly the majority view in Scotland as well, about the debate about protecting women's spaces and trans rights and so on. I think also I'd point to the removal of the dwelling defence. Now, that means that things you say in your own home are not going to be protected. So if you call a member of your own family, let's say your husband or your father, a grumpy old git, that can be an offence under this act, a hate crime on the basis of age. So it's a completely farcical piece of legislation. Everyone warned the Scottish government it was going to be a complete disaster. But this afternoon, it really has got even worse than its worst critics would have thought, because we have the bizarre position now where non-crime hate incidents are not being recorded against the First Minister, who has become the most complained about person under his own legislation for a pretty notorious speech he gave 3 or 4 years ago. So a non-crime hate incident is not being recorded against him, but one is recorded still against the Scottish Conservative MSP Murdo Fraser, for his views about the trans debate, and for his view that saying you could change your gender identity was as nonsensical as saying that you could identify as a cat.
I spoke to Murdo Fraser actually a little bit earlier today, and he was making clear that his view was criticising Scottish government policy. He's an opposition politician in the Scottish Parliament, and under this new law that the Scottish government has passed, they've criminalised, in effect, or perhaps made a non-crime hate incident, whatever on earth that means, out of what their political opponents are saying. That's a really dark path to tread.
Correct. This law would have been bad enough if it had been applied even-handedly, but we are now in the position where if you are a government minister in Scotland, you will not have a non-crime hate incident recorded against you. If you are a politically inconvenient target, a target who's not going to be easy to bully, such as J.K. Rowling, you will not have a non-crime hate incident recorded against you. She's been incredibly courageous and outspoken in opposing this act. But what about ordinary members of the public? What about politicians like Murdo Fraser, who take a different view to government ministers? What about people who have job offers withdrawn because they have a non-crime hate incident recorded against them, which, by the way, they might only find out about by accident?
No, it's a really, really concerning situation. And just finally, you mentioned the situation of someone arguing perhaps with their spouse in their home and someone taking offence at that. But it's worse than that, isn't it? Even if both parties to that discussion didn't think that something hateful went on, if a third party to that conversation, if someone not involved in that conversation overheard it and thought it was hateful, that can still be reported.
Yes, that's correct. And the Scottish police have vowed to investigate every single complaint. And as you'll know, they've had nearly 4,000 complaints in the first 24 hours alone. God only knows what that figure will be now. And good luck to people who have had their house burgled, who have been attacked. I think 24 people on average can expect to be the victims of burglary in Scotland on any given day. Good luck to those people trying to get the police to attend to that and to get the burglar prosecuted.
Well, Benjamin, it's an absolutely shocking state of affairs, not least north of the border. I am absolutely flabbergasted that this became an act of Parliament, of the Scottish Parliament, and with such little opposition as well. Perhaps that's the most pernicious thing. But really appreciate your time and your expertise on this matter. Really, really interesting stuff there. Now we have a little time for something that Nigel likes to call What the Farage. And this is a smaller story that I think deserves a little bit of prominence, perhaps, because the deputy leader of the Labour Party has been having this story sort of rumble along for a long time. What am I talking about? Of course, Angela Rayner's selling one of her houses. It happened to be a former council house. She bought it, of course, under that right that we all gained under Margaret Thatcher. Good for her. But it seems that there are questions of whether or not tax was paid on this, or should tax have been paid on this. No tax was paid, although there are some experts who say that there should have been. There should have been capital gains tax paid on this property. Now, the police say that they're reassessing whether or not they should investigate this. But the news today is that neighbours of Angela Rayner, people that have been bringing this up, people that live next to that house that was sold originally, well, they say now they've not been contacted by the police. So what is it? Is the police reassessing this situation, or have they just said that they are, and actually they're not doing that at all? Sometimes it seems as though opposition politicians can get away with things that government ministers really do not. Of course, we must say that Angela Rayner is confident. She says she's done nothing wrong. But the police say, at the very least, they're reassessing this. What a curious state of affairs. Perhaps it will become less opaque as time goes on. Now, next in the programme, we're going to be talking about an extraordinary call from members of Parliament. Yes, some MPs are calling for a tax on people who fly multiple journeys in a year. A frequent flyer levy. They want to fix the environment. Well, is this particularly fair? And who could afford it? That next.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 p.m.
Scotland's new hate crime law, which comes into effect on April Fool's Day, criminalises threatening or abusive or insulting behaviour which is intended to stir up hatred against people based on age, disability, religion, sexual orientation and transgender identity. The act has proved controversial. The head of complaints at the police watchdog says it could have a chilling effect on freedom of speech. But the bill's defenders say it is nowhere near as draconian as is being suggested, and protecting people from hate is long overdue. So joining me to discuss this, the Alba MP for Kirkcaldy, Neil Hanvey. Welcome to the show, Neil. Now, Humza Yousaf has come out and said there's been a lot of disinformation about this. People are overreacting. This bill is absolutely fine. Is he right?
No, well, I made a bit of a light-hearted comment on his claim that there's disinformation being spread about this legislation by saying he'd misspelled information. Because what's really happening is that people are spreading the truth about this legislation, and it's, you know, nobody is saying that hate crime should be given a green light, but the way that this bill has been, or this act has been constructed, is deliberately intended to prevent freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of belief. There are certain elements that are excluded from the bill, particularly around gender critical beliefs, and most importantly, sex as a class, so women's sex-based rights are not covered by this bill. The bill is silent on the definition of sex, and therefore same-sex attraction is effectively meaningless. And it really has a chilling effect on political discourse.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
It's coming up to 10 to 8, and now here's a story that will have some people fuming, for want of a better word. That was a poor joke about aeroplane fumes, but why am I talking about this nonsense? Well, there have been a number of MPs who have suggested bringing forward what's known as the Jet Zero strategy. And they want to introduce new measures, new taxes, new laws to stop people flying quite so much. But should we listen? Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me in the studio is Alethea Warrington, the senior campaigner at the climate charity Possible.
Hi.
Alethea, thank you for joining us. What is it exactly that these MPs are saying?
So really, the Committee of MPs in Parliament are calling for the government strategy on aviation to start reflecting reality. We're in the middle of a climate crisis. All sectors need to do their bit. And there is just no way to fly a plane without burning huge amounts of fossil fuels and producing huge amounts of emissions. All the potential solutions to allow low-carbon flight are a long way away. They're very undeveloped, or they're very, very speculative. And this is why the MPs are calling on the government to start planning seriously for an aviation strategy that has to include demand management.
Now, demand management is a bit of a fancy phrase. What that means is stop people flying so much.
It means stopping the most frequent flyers from flying so much. And, you know, you were talking about people fuming. Well, actually, the frequent flyer levy is a very popular solution because it would leave most people unaffected. It would just target the small group of people who take most of the flights.
What is a frequent flyer? How many flights do I have to take to become a frequent flyer?
So just 15% of people take 70% of all the flights. And if you fly 3 or more times each year, that puts you in that 15%. And these are the group of people who need to cut back on their flights.
So just 3 flights and I'm a frequent flyer. If I've got a friend's stag do in Prague and I get a 20 quid flight out there on Ryanair and then I go on my annual family holiday, just one more flight and you want to tax me?
So somebody who is taking 3 foreign holidays a year actually is highly likely to be in one of the wealthier segments of the population anyway. These are people with high carbon lifestyle choices, which are actually not reflective of the population in general, because most people fly once a year or even less than that. So yeah, actually those are the people, those frequent flyers, who have to start cutting back.
Well, hold that thought. We're going to come back to you. Let's take those facts to Tim Jeans, the former managing director of Monarch Airlines, who was also previously chair of Cornwall Airport. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Frankly, do you recognise that conversation that we have been having, that a small number of people, well, 15% of people are doing a profound amount of damage, apparently, to the environment?
Well, the thing is, we've managed to democratise air travel in the last couple of decades. So we're all able to fly. We can all afford to fly. And we have many, many different reasons for flying, from holidays to business travel, but to visiting friends and relatives, going to family occasions. Flying is something that everybody can afford, and they are, by and large, paying their taxes. Air passenger duty in the UK is amongst the highest in the world. So take, for example, somebody going on holiday to Florida with their family. They'll be paying over £300 in air passenger duty. And air passengers contribute over £3 billion a year to the exchequer because of the air passenger duty they pay. So to say that air travellers are not doing their bit, and the more they fly, the more they pay, I think it's a bit disingenuous.
So
Well,
Tim,
to say the least.
you're saying that actually people who take 3 flights a year might not be in the top income brackets. This is actually people on very modest salaries often who are taking 3 flights a year.
Very, very modest salaries. People who are, I know of care workers who are travelling to and from assignments in Europe who are taking vastly more than 3 flights a year. Students who are studying from overseas universities are also flying, in many cases, to the UK and from the UK. And it's those kind of people we hit. It's those people who can afford to fly business class, who can afford to fly on the, if you like, the high cost legacy carriers. They're already paying, and they probably could afford to pay more. But what
That's
we're looking
a
at here is
really interesting
millions...
point, and one that we're going to pass back to Alethea. Frankly, the rich could pay all of these taxes that you're proposing. It's people like care workers and students and people on modest incomes who'll be whacked by your taxes.
That's actually not the case, because the frequent flyer levy is designed to avoid targeting people on lower incomes who fly occasionally. It's designed to target the wealthier people in society who fly most often. And it's absolutely the case that we need other policies as well. We certainly need a tax, or ideally a ban, on private jets. And we also need a ban on airport expansion, because it is really irresponsible for so many of the airports across the UK to be trying to expand in the middle of a climate crisis.
Do you not recognise that the United Kingdom has done more than any G20 country to cut its carbon emissions since 1990? That we've got some of the highest taxes on our carbon, on our flights, of anywhere in the world?
That's actually not true. Aviation is very undertaxed. The entire aviation industry does not pay a single penny of fuel tax on all the kerosene.
And yet air passenger duty is quite high comparatively.
Not compared to the emissions that it produces.
Compared to any other country in the world.
It is ridiculous that a billionaire on a private jet doesn't pay any fuel tax, and a
have run out of
does.
time. Alethea, really appreciate your time. Jacob Rees-Mogg is up next, but that's it from me on Farage. Thank you for your company.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Well, there will be some further heavy rain first thing across southern areas, but in general, Thursday offers some much drier weather compared to the wet weather we've seen recently. Northeastern areas have suffered the most with the rain throughout today. That rain will clear away through tonight, but the next batch arrives into the southwest. We'll see 2 bursts of rain. This one will turn heavy at first in the southwest, but as it pushes into parts of northern England, it will turn a little bit dry, but most areas will see some heavy outbreaks of rain through the night. Further north and west, though, it should stay dry, and we could see a touch of frostbite tomorrow morning. But it's in the southwest tomorrow morning where the heaviest rain will be, and that will push into parts of Wales, the Midlands, into the southeast throughout the rush hour. So if you are moving about on Thursday morning, expect some tricky travelling conditions. Once that does clear out the way, we'll see a mix of sunshine and showers for many areas of England and Wales. There will be some decent sunny spells in between. It will feel fairly pleasant in that sunshine, but further north, it's going to considerably drier day than it has been lately. We'll see highs of around 10 or 11 degrees across northwestern areas. It's still cold though in the far north of Scotland, and as the next batch of rain bumps into that cold air on Friday morning, there's a risk of some snow across the Highlands and Grampians, and we'll see outbreaks of quite heavy rain push through many northern areas throughout Friday. Further south though, it turns drier as the day goes on, but the weekend is looking unsettled and seasonably windy, but exceptionally mild. That's all for now. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the